Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 5 of Book 2 of the Royal Ranger series, The Red Fox Clan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Gillen and Horace leaned over the map spread out on Gillen's desk. Horace was using the point of his dagger to indicate features on the map as he spoke. Our spies tell us that the Red Fox Clan have gathered somewhere in this area. He traced the dagger point along a winding river, indicating a spot 4 days' ride north of Castle Araluen. The Wesel River, Gillen commented, noting the name. He touched a marked feature on the north bank, by a long curve in the waterway. What's this? It's an old hill fort, Horace told him. Hasn't been inhabited in centuries. Are the Foxes using it? Gillen asked. Horace shook his head. No. So far as I know, they have a camp somewhere on the south bank, along this long, curving stretch. So, if we approach from the south, we'll have them hemmed in against the river. That's right. The river is deep, and there aren't many fords. It's not a particularly good tactical position for them. But then, they seem to be pretty low on tactical sense. They're not trained warriors, then? Gillen asked. Not from what I've heard. They're mainly brigands and thugs, who have been recruited to the Red Fox Clan by the promise of payment and easy pickings. There may be half a dozen or so trained men among their leaders, but the rest appear to be a rabble. Numbers? Horace rested the point of the dagger in the rough wood of the desktop. 30 to 40, no more than that, he said. Then, preempting the next question, he added, I figure we'll take 20 cavalrymen and 20 archers with us. He glanced up. They're trained men, and they've all been in battle before. I don't think 40 raggle-tailed rebels will give us too much trouble. Gillen grinned. Particularly not with you and me along, he said. He was joking, but there was a strong element of truth in the joke. Horace was the preeminent warrior of the kingdom, skillful, fast, and strong. His amazing ability had been noted when he was barely 16 years old. Now, many years later, he had added a wealth of experience to his natural skill. And Gillen, of course, was the Ranger Commandant, and as such, he was one of the most capable Rangers in the Corps. We'll be taking rations for 10 days, Horace told the Ranger. Dried meat and fruit, and flatbread. Each man will have 2 canteens. Once we're on the way, I want to move quickly and get to the Wesel River before they hear word that we're coming. The sooner we wrap this up, the better. We'll bivouac at night and avoid towns and villages on the way. Good thinking. The fewer people who see us, the better. When do we leave? The cavalrymen are still mustering their remounts. The horses have been out in the fields for several months, and it'll take a few days to get them settled and retrained for carrying riders. They go half wild when they're left alone for any length of time. So we should be ready to go by the end of the week. That way, I'll get a chance to see Maddie before I leave. Maddie was due to arrive the following morning. I'll get you to check over the archer's equipment tomorrow, if you would, Horace continued. You know what to look for better than I do. Gillen nodded assent. He reached down and slid the map across the desk, unrolling it a little more to find the area where Castle Redmont was situated. Halt and Will should be well on their way by now, he said. Do you expect them to find anything? Horace shrugged. The intelligence was sketchy, more rumor than hard fact. But I can't afford to ignore it. I'll sleep better if I know those two have had a good look around. This fox cult may be a bunch of blowhards, but an idea like this can gain momentum all too quickly. And before you know it, we could have a full-scale uprising on our hands. We need to nip it in the bud right away. Gillen released the edge of the map, allowing it to roll closed once again. Best way to handle it, he said. Strike fast before things get out of hand. Horace straightened from where he'd been leaning on the desktop. He re-rolled the map into a tight cylinder and slipped a loop of brown ribbon over the end to contain it. It should take us 3 or 4 days to reach the Wesel, he said. Then a couple more days to locate the Fox's camp, and we can put an end to this nonsense. Gillen grunted agreement, but he was frowning slightly. One fact was causing him concern. Horace noted his expression. "Is there a problem?" Gillen hesitated. 40 cavalrymen and archers, he said. "That's more than half the standing garrison here. Are you worried that you might be leaving Cassandra short-handed if there's trouble?" Horace shook his head. "Araluen is easily defended," he said. "Even a small garrison can hold it. And Cassandra is a good commander. She's seen her share of combat." Gillen nodded. "That's a fact," he said. Cassandra had proved her worth in battles from the coastal plains of Scandia to the desert wastes of Arida and the rugged mountains of Nihanya. Given a virtually impregnable position like Castle Araluen, there was no doubt that she could mount an effective and successful defense against any foreseeable threat. Maddie and Ingrid had made good time after leaving Redmont. The weather was good, and the roads were clear. Ingrid looked at the sun, gauging the time by its position in the sky. "You'll need to change clothes soon," she warned. "Time for you to become a princess again." Maddie wrinkled her nose distastefully. She was still dressed as a ranger, although she rode with her cowl back and her head bare. She enjoyed the comfort of the ranger clothes. They were loose-fitting and unrestrictive. By contrast, the riding gown she would soon put on would be tight and uncomfortable, designed for style rather than function. Bumper sniggered. "Dressmaker's dummy." "Don't you laugh, Pag Pony," she said softly. Ingrid glanced her way. "Did you say something?" Maddie hurriedly shook her head. She wasn't sure how her maid would react to the fact that she spoke to her horse, and believed he spoke back to her. Ingrid would probably think her mistress was crazy. But then, Ingrid was half convinced of that anyway, not understanding how Maddie could prefer the rough and ready life of a ranger's apprentice to the soft comforts and fine clothes of a princess. Then the matter was forgotten, and Ingrid gestured down to the track. "We have company." They had left the open country on the far side of the river, and the road at this point led through a section of alder forest. The trees were tall and grew close together on either side of the path, which had narrowed down until it was just wide enough for two riders to travel abreast. About 30 meters ahead of them, two men had stepped out of the trees to block the path. They were both heavily built and dressed in rough, stained clothing. Both were armed. The man on the right held a bow with an arrow fitted to the string, but not yet drawn. The flights of more arrows were visible over his shoulder, where they were held in a rough quiver. He had a long knife at his waist. The other, a slightly taller man, had a heavy cudgel in his right hand. It was made from a piece of hardwood, tapering down from a wide head to a narrower hand grip, wrapped with a leather strap. The heavy head was liberally studded with spikes. Altogether, it was an unpleasant sight, as was its owner. Instinctively, both girls had drawn rein and brought their horses to a stop. Beneath her, Maddie felt Bumper's body vibrate as he sounded a warning rumble. "Maybe we should have brought an escort," Ingrid said quietly, although Maddie noted that she didn't seem too concerned about the situation. "For these two drabs?" she replied. "You've got to be joking." Maddie lifted her right leg over the pommel and slid to the ground beside Bumper. As she did, she reached for the sling that was coiled under her belt, shaking it loose and feeling in her belt pouch with her other hand for several of the smooth, heavy lead shot she kept there. Her bow was in its bow case, tied to the right-hand rear of her saddle, but she wasn't concerned about that. The sling was her weapon of choice, anyway. Not needing to look, she loaded a slug into the pouch of the sling. The practiced ease with which she did this should possibly have sounded a warning to the two brigands. But they were overconfident, seeing no possible danger from two young women. She stepped a pace away from Bumper, giving herself room to wield the sling. Ingrid looked down at her. "Anything particular in mind?" Maddie shook her head. "Let's see how things turn out," she said, letting the sling hang to full length beside her. Bumper was continuing to rumble deep in his chest, a low, warning note that was audible only for a few meters. The man with the bow raised it now, although he still didn't draw the arrow back. "Don't keep us waiting, girls," he called out. "Just come forward and hand over your valuables. It'll go easier for you if you do." There was a note of amusement in his voice. Maddie sensed that he was very satisfied with the situation. Ingrid was well dressed and was sure to have money and jewelry on her. Her horse was a well-bred mare and was obviously worth money as well, as was Sundancer, who was bringing up the rear, carrying their baggage. Bumper, of course, appeared unimpressive, a rough, little barrel-shaped horse that was probably sturdy and hard-working, but not worth a great deal. All in all, the two girls looked like ideal prey for the robbers. Relatively helpless and unprotected by guards, they would offer little resistance to two armed men. "We'll stay here, I think," Ingrid replied. In a quieter voice, she said to Maddie, "We could always turn back." Maddie shook her head. "They wouldn't make it so easy. By now, you'll probably find there's a third member of the band who has worked his way behind us." Ingrid glanced over her shoulder and saw that Maddie was right. A third figure, equally roughly dressed and armed with a heavy staff surmounted by a spearhead, was standing at the point where the track led into the trees, silhouetted against the bright sunlight behind him. "You're right," she said. She took a firmer grip on her riding crop. Ingrid never used it on her horse, keeping it instead as a concealed weapon. It was a piece of stout ashwood, 50 centimeters long, wrapped in leather, and with a polished stone pommel at one end. The other end tapered down to the whip section, a flat piece of braided leather. In addition, as was the custom for ladies, she wore a dagger on her belt. "I'll take care of the bowman first," Maddie said in an undertone. "With any luck, the others will run once he's down." "And without any luck?" Ingrid asked. Maddie grinned. "It'll be their bad luck," she said. All right, that's going to be it for Chapter 5. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'll see all of y'all next time in Chapter 6. God bless and have a good one.